Ideally, I'd like to do 2 shoulder muscle tests and 2 shoulder girdle muscle tests, but the way it usually works out is you do 1 shoulder muscle test and 1 shoulder girdle muscle test. Okay, so the same thing happens. I show the patient what weakness they're going to simulate, and I'm not going to tell you this time what it is. Okay, so as a PTA, you won't know what the weakness is. You'll just know that your patient's going to have a weakness. And I'll say to you, I want you to measure her right shoulder lateral rotators. Right shoulder lateral rotators. Okay, so again, the patient should not immediately get into position. The patient's just going to do whatever you say. So what position would you tell her to get into?
Prone.
Into prone. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do the prone, please. Okay, and actually, probably what Chase and I will do right away is ask you to show us on Muscle Man what muscles do lateral rotation and where you would palpate for those. All right, so for lateral rotation, what muscles do that at the shoulder joint? There's a bunch of them, right?
Infra, major.
Use full names.
Infraspinatus.
Infraspinatus. Now when you guys palpate that, you're immediately going to go over here and say infraspinatus over here. And what else does it? Close to the infraspinatus? Teres minor. And you're going to be very confident. You say right there. And I'm going to say, well, show me over here. Because we got the trapezius taken off that side. That's a little too easy. This is more realistic over here. And this is where I generally see panic. So I'm letting you know ahead of time, be able to palpate on this side too. All right, how do I find those muscles? Well, what's this right here? This is the scapula. This is the inferior angle of the scapula right here. It's covered with fascia right there. But infraspinatus would be right there. Right? And then this is teres minor right in here. Okay? All right, so you need to be able to palpate that on Muscle Man. Is there anything else that does lateral rotation that we could palpate?
Posterior deltoid.
Posterior deltoid does it also. All right, so those are good places to palpate when it comes time to distinguish between a 1 and a 0. Okay? All right, so got her in prone. What else do how else do I need her to be? And what side was it? It was right. Oh, good. So this is the right side. Yep. Okay, so let me get you to bring your arm to the side. And just for a little comfort here, let's go ahead and put this down. Okay. Now, looking at the criteria. So, number 1, give appropriate explanations and instructions. Again, it should be something very easy. Brittany, we're going to see how strong some of the muscles in your shoulder are. Okay. Something as simple as that. Okay, number 2, position and stabilize the patient appropriately. So this is a good position. We need to stabilize the proximal bone that most of the muscles attach to, which would be what in this case? Scapula again. So the weight of her body probably is enough to stabilize it. If not, I could stick a hand there to give more stabilization. But more than likely, the weight of her body will be enough. Number 3, again, we're going to determine the available range of motion. Very important to do that. Passively or actively?
Passive.
Again, it's passive. All right, so here's the motion I want you to do. Okay. And I saw, it looks like she has about how much range of motion?
Full.
It looks like it's full range of motion, or about 90 degrees or so. Okay, very important to see that. To see her available range of motion and to show her the exact motion that I want her to do. Okay, so I just did number 3. And then number 4 is very important. So let's see how Brittany does with her limitation. Can you do that motion for me? Good, she was trying. And as a patient, try to be as realistic as you can. Try to make it look like you're trying if you've got a weakness. All right, so what grade do I give her?
2 under.
Okay. Did you say 200?
2 under.
Oh. Okay, what do you mean 2 under?
Well, she wasn't able to go through any range of motion against gravity, so she has to at least be a 2 or under. She can't be higher than a 2.
Okay, good. All right, could she be a 2 plus?
No. That would be
Just to
less
be-
than half.
Because she would have to go at least or less than halfway against gravity. She can't even do that. So she's under a 2 plus, or, as Seth said, she's a 2 or less at this point. Okay, so am I going to need to give resistance at all? No, there's no need to give resistance if she can't even move against the resistance of gravity. Now, just for the sake, let's change your muscle grade for a little bit. Let's say that you're a grade 4. Okay, so process that for a second. Okay, go ahead and try the motion again. Okay, and you can put it back down. Now I know she's at least a grade 3. So now I need to start giving resistance. All right, and remember we're going to give 2 fingers here because this is the position of dislocation. And we're going to give it, we're going to try to do a turning motion. And here's another place where students have trouble with this skills test. If she's doing lateral rotation, and I'm testing the strength of the lateral rotators, what is the direction of my resistance? It's a medial rotation. So can you do that motion again and hold it there? Now what's a good word to use? Hold. Here's often what I'll say. Okay, now hold it there, hold it, hold it. What am I testing there? I'm actually testing the strength of the medial rotators because I was trying to move her into more lateral rotation. So really think through this. Go ahead and do that again. And I have to tell her how much resistance I'm giving. I'm giving you minimal resistance. Hold it right there. Okay? She held with minimal resistance. She's at least a grade, you can relax. At least a grade 3 plus. Okay? I'm going to see now if she can hold against moderate resistance. Can you go ahead and do that? Hold it there. This is moderate resistance. Hold it. Hold it. All right. She just broke. Did Brittany lose any points?
Yes.
Yes, she did. Because what grade is she? She's supposed to be a 4, but she just showed me what?
3 plus.
3 plus because she broke on 4. Brittany loses points. Hopefully not in the real thing, but that's the case. And there is a place, if you look on page 177, underneath the grading criteria, it says patient simulation 10 points. Right? So she's just lost 1, maybe 2 points because of the goniometry too. All right, so that's both for the goniometry and the muscle testing. So as a patient, you need to be as accurate as possible. Okay, now did I need to start with minimal assistance or could I have started with maximal resistance? Either way, it depends, so I can see it going both ways. All right, so remember when you're giving resistance, you have to say out loud so that I and the patient knows how much resistance you're giving. Okay, here's another thing I tend to see. Okay, you're grade 4, right? All right. Go ahead and do the motion. Hold it there. This is minimal, this is moderate, this is max. Okay? So I say that very frequently. You got to give some time for the patient to process and to know when to break. Okay. And remember, as a patient, a break doesn't mean you just totally give away. It's just there's a give. And if you're not sure if she gave, what could you do? You can say, did you give? No, you can't do that. Right? You try it again and see if there was a give or not. Okay. Okay, so now we're back to your original muscle grade. Do you remember what that is? Okay, can you do that motion for her?
No.
She can't do it. All right. So what do I got to do now?
Gravity assistance.
I've got to minimize gravity. Now, I could do it manually in this position, right? I could give her enough assistance to overcome the resistance of gravity. But we're going to do the most obvious thing, if it's possible, and that would be to what? Put her in a gravity minimized position, which would be what for lateral rotators?
Seated?
Yes, sitting. So can I get you sitting on the side, please? Okay, now here's something I tend to see too. What side are we doing? So I'll tend to see people go to the wrong side when they change positions. So I got that right side. That's this side over here. Okay. Relax. Here's the motion I want you to do. Just like that. All right, can you do that for me? All right, what grade is she? Now, notice the first thing I did, again, I saw what her available range of motion was. Just right. So I see her arm, and then have her do it herself. Did she go through the full available range of motion?
No.
Nope. She was in a gravity minimized position, so that's a grade 2 minus. Whether it's less than or more than halfway, if it's not full way, that's a 2 minus. What was I doing with her over here? Supporting the weight of her hand and her forearm. She shouldn't have to use her elbow flexors to hold it up. Am I assisting her in the movement?
No.
Am I resisting?
No.
Here's another thing I tend to see, is people starting to give resistance in this position. If she can't go against the resistance of gravity, there's no need to give manual resistance. But I do want to support the part as she tries to move it herself. Okay, now, no matter what grade you get, whether it's a 5 or it's a 2 minus, Chase and I are going to ask you, now let me see you distinguish between a 1 and a 0, so that you'll have to palpate. Okay, now I could palpate in this position and that would be fine. But what's an easy position to try to get a muscle to contract in?
Against gravity.
Against gravity. So can I get you back prone again, please? Okay, so we're back in our original position. And what am I going to palpate? I'm going to try to palpate infraspinatus and teres minor. Okay, so here's the spine of the scapula. Go inferior to that. Let me find her. There's the inferior angle right there. So I'm going to palpate right there. Now try to do that motion for me. And you can't do it. Okay, and as a patient, when we get to this point where the PTA is palpating, just assume you're like a grade 1. And you can't do the motion, but you're going to try to do it. Okay, so go ahead and try to do the motion. I feel a contraction, that would be a grade. Okay, and we're going to ask you to show us 2 ways to get that muscle to contract. So that's one way. What's the other way?
Put it in position and ask him to hold it.
Put her in the position. Say, hold it right there now. Don't let it fall. She can't do it. I'm feeling if the muscle is contracting. Hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it. Yeah, let me just show. I could do that in sitting. Can you sit with your legs hanging off the back of the side, please? And I'm going to go ahead and switch arms just to make it easier. Okay, I could do that. So I could go ahead and try to bring your arm out like that. Can you do that? Okay, she's trying but can't do it. Okay, or I can put her in the position. Now gravity is not going to move her, right? So I have to do it now. Try to hold it there. Hold it. Can you hold it? Hold it. Hold it. Hold it. She can't, but I can feel it contracting. So that's a grade 1. Okay, so we'll ask you to show us 2 ways to get the muscle you're palpating to contract. All right, so let's look at the criteria. So we did number 4, have the patient attempt active range of motion. Number 5, if you see any substitutions, really try to correct those. We want to isolate whatever motion. You can turn around if you need to. Try to isolate the motion you're assessing. Number 6, apply appropriate resistance to the participating muscles. And again, remember, you have to tell us how much resistance you're giving. What's the general principle about where you put your resistance?
This aspect of the bone where the muscle inserts.
Right. So with lateral rotation, that's a little different because you have to increase your lever arm. But if we were doing shoulder flexion or abduction, The humerus is the distal bone of that joint, and so generally you're going to give your resistance to the distal end of that bone. That's the general principle. Okay, we talked about number 7. You need to accurately palpate appropriate muscles or muscle group on both the model, muscle man, and on the subject. Okay, once you do the test, Chase or I will ask you what grade did you get right there. We'll ask you what grade did you get. And then again, once you tell us that, you're going to walk over to this paper that'll be close by, and you're going to find, in this case, shoulder. I'll put lateral rotators 2- over 5. So remember, muscle grades are the grade over 5. You'll write that down, and then you'll do your second muscle test. So remember, you'll do one shoulder joint muscle test and one shoulder girdle muscle test. Okay, and I'll talk more about the documentation and your SOAP note in just a minute. Critical safety elements, your body mechanics, and that you're being safe with the patient. And then pass-fail number 11 is if you're instructed to measure shoulder lateral rotation, but you actually measure shoulder medial rotation, which tends to happen, then that would be an automatic fail. And you have to repeat the test. Okay, so anything to clarify about the criteria for the muscle test or the goniometry?